Prestigious magazine Vanity Fair published the following in 2021. The Puerto Rican expert who helped West Side Story get it right this time. And there's a quote by Virginia Sanchez Korrol. She said, "I was hoping that they would right the wrongs." She is the author of several works, including From Colonia to Community, The History of Puerto Ricans in New York City, and Feminists and Abolitionists, The Story of Emilia Casanova. Here is what Professor Sanchez Korrol wrote. In the spring of 2019, Steven Spielberg invited me to speak about New York Puerto Rican history to the cast, crew, and creative production team of a new film version of West Side Story. My immediate inclination was to scan my bookshelves in search of the written record our Puerto Rican mid-century writers were rarely referenced in textbooks or educational settings, and I wanted this influential gathering of filmmakers to become familiar with my mid-century New Yorican city through the lens of our chroniclers from our first encounter. Let's hear what happened. Virginia, what did you feel when you got a call from the Spielberg office?
Totally unexpected. And in my later career has been the highlight of my entire all of the reasons why I do the things I do is to get our stories known. And I could not think of a more important platform to tell our stories than a film by none other than Steven Spielberg and Tony Kushner. And to become the historical consultant on on that film, to me, has been a tremendous honor. And I understand people have to understand that a historical consultant can give advice and can consult, but it doesn't have to be taken. And this was the first time that I had ever done something so major, uh, super production that was known worldwide. So in my becoming the historical consultant, the the way that our film worked was a little bit out of the ordinary because uh, I was there often on set, and I not only consulted with Spielberg and with Kushner, but I also gave lectures to the entire cast and the creative and the production team. And this was something that Stephen wanted done from the beginning because he wanted everyone to be on the same page and to know something about the Puerto Rican community. So I gave two lectures before I was invited to be historical consultant. And as historical consultant, I worked with the script. I told Tony Kushner what I thought, what improvements could be made, or ask questions about things that he had written. And we sort of worked it out, and then he would consult me throughout the rest of the time that the film was being made. He would consult me on language. He would consult me on history. I'd get a phone call out of the blue when I was on my way to my yoga class, and it was Tony asking me if it was this word was proper or that word. Um, and the amazing thing about it, and this is important to know because this was my first time in a big movie. I've done documentaries and I've commented on historical things and academic things, but never something like this. So I thought, well, this is how it is. No, this is not how it is. This is not how a historical consultant works.
But you've been doing it in different ways for many years.
Well, of course, I've been doing this. I've been resurrecting our history, especially our history in New York. That was my, you know, that was what I set out to do. I knew it was, yeah, I knew that that was what I was going to do. I never thought of myself as a person who would become famous or would become or was in it for the money. You don't go into these things for money because there is no money. So you can wipe that out. But I was doing it because I really knew that there was a New Eurekan experience that was separate from and yet connected to the experiences of growing up in Puerto Rico. And I saw my older cousins and I saw all of their children become very American. And I said, I, I, I vowed to myself that I would put down our story, not for me, but for my nieces, my nephews, my children, my daughters at this point don't have children, so I'm not talking about grandchildren, but for the generations to come, there has to be a record. There has to be something concrete that they could look at. Okay, so and that's one of the reasons I went into Puerto Rican studies, and I'm a pioneer in that field because I started in our department before it was even 10 years old. So, but I knew what was happening. I knew from my own work and my own reading, and I was already in grad school, uh, trying to learn as much as I could. To me, the goal was always get these stories into mainstream because our community has suffered enough discrimination and enough lack of knowledge. And we are not just Puerto Ricans, we're New Eurekans. We embody a different experience. And what we've done in life has combined that both our parents' experience and ours.
And how did they get in touch with you?
Text message from someone representing Steven Spielberg. And so the first thing that I did was, okay, all right, they're calling me in for my ideas or my consultation. I'm sure that Spielberg is not going to be there. None of these people are going to be there, right? This is just, but they should listen to me and they should listen to all of the other people like me that have gone through these experiences. And I made sure that I consulted the work of Jesus Colon, who was writing in English about during the 1950s about our community, Bernardo Vega, who was writing in Spanish, Schomburg, who was also leaving a legacy of the history of Black Puerto Ricans and Black people throughout the world. So I knew that, I had all of that information and I said, okay, I'm going, this is what I'm going to give them. And I thought, I honestly did think that it was going to, they're inviting people to come and talk, to give them ideas, so to give them, tell them something about the history of West Side Story. Well, of course, Stephen was there. Tony Kushner was there. I told you Rita Moreno came. Everybody, the entire cast and crew, including Dudamel, who is now the head of the New York Philharmonic, was there with a few members of his orchestra. Um, and and I started to tell them, okay, this is what happens. Our community is very, very old. It doesn't begin in the 1950s. It begins well before into the 19th century. And this is what's happened. And I knew that, yeah, and I figured they knew. Oh, I when I got there, I didn't know what it was that they wanted from me. But then I saw one of the producers walking around with my book. And I said, oh, good, okay, so they know Colonia to community. And I don't remember if I told you, but maybe a year later, when I told the story about Stephen suddenly coming, I want to say hello to Virginia and take a picture with Virginia, huh? uh, and uh, when I told the story to some of the cast members when we were working during the pandemic, one of them said, first of all, you thought we were lying? I said, yeah. Well, I don't know. Yeah, it's a little lie. Yeah, but I was hoping that I was going to come anyway because I wanted to give you a piece of my mind on this. And she said, we researched you. We had pictures of you. We knew your work. We were afraid you weren't going to come. So I said, oh my God, I've got to change anything I wrote about this. I've got to change it. Well, for the San Juan Hill project, what I did was that I wrote a piece that first talks about the work of Colón and the work of Bernardo Vega, and how they were writing at a time that was a very, very difficult time for Puerto Ricans in New York City. That was the time of the 1950s, mid to late 1950s, right after the war, the Second World War, when the migration from Puerto Rico was very, very large. I had a number of opportunities to write about my experience with West Side Story. And I didn't because I wasn't ready to talk about it. I realized as I started to put together, memoirs and things like that, I realized that if I didn't tell the story, it would be lost. And the only person who could tell the story is me, because this is my perspective and this is what I experienced. So the important thing about that was that I was able to bring to them all of the knowledge that we have accumulated in the past 50 years about us, about our community, about in every subject, because as soon as we began Puerto Rican studies at the university level, we began to put together a knowledge base. And that was available, that knowledge base, and the archives that are at Hunter College was available to Steven Spielberg and to Tony Kushner when they began to make this film. This material was not available to the creators of the 1961 movie. It was not available. We didn't have any we were fighting to get an education at that point. Now, 50 years later, we had the intelligence. We had the information. And so I started to think about, well, maybe I should do this writing right now. And also, and it happened that the Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts was beginning to explore putting together an archive on the lost community of San Juan Hill. Now, that lost community of San Juan Hill is really interesting because although it was a poor community, below poverty level, you had a lot of speakeasies, you had a lot of bodegas, you had a lot of people living in that area from 63rd to maybe 70th Street, and bordered by the river, and I think maybe 10th Avenue, 11th Avenue. That area that becomes Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts. Those were tenements of Black Americans, and the history of that area goes back to the 19th century. And there were Black Puerto Ricans who were living in that area as early as 1920. In fact, in 1915, Schomburg and his family are living in San Juan Hill. And he appears in the census record with 3 of his children and his wife. And it is from San Juan Hill that he begins to do the work of exploring and researching the Black experience worldwide. And from there, he goes on to put together a collection of books and articles and posters and everything that he could find to tell the story of Black people from the Caribbean and from the United States. And that becomes the Schomburg Center for research and culture in Black culture. Today, the most famous, one of the most important centers for that. Well, he was where he was living in San Juan Hill during that time. So that was my objective, open people's minds, let them see for themselves. And unfortunately, what the 1961 movie did, according to many people, including Jesus Colon, was that it presented a negative portrait of the Puerto Rican experience, and it did in many ways. Even Rita had talked about the dark makeup that the Puerto Ricans had to the people play the people playing the Puerto Rican role. And now 60 years later, here she is playing a new role that was written exclusively for her as the wife of Doc. And she is also an executive producer on the movie.
Virginia, did they write in a line about you in the film?
Yeah, Kushner came over and he said, I don't know if you're going to like this or not, but I want to put in an homage to the people of your generation who were beginning to go to CUNY. And so he put in, and he didn't know how I was going to react. And I laughed. I laughed because I thought that was both adorable and also, like, wow, you know, unbelievable. And and then I realized that he didn't expect laughter. And I said, Tony, that is the most wonderful thing that anybody could do. And so he put in the line using my name as the symbol of, and the line is so and so's cousin Virginia is going to City College. So he said, I couldn't say Brooklyn College because the story is taking place in Manhattan. And I figured, well, not people, who's gonna even listen to that? And besides, Virginia is not Virginia, right?
Virginia.
Virginia with right in the Spanish, right?
Tell me about the readers they had at the tobacco cigar factories.
Yeah, they had the custom of having a reader in the cigar factories, and the reader, because this is a time in the 19th century where uh, when tobacco becomes one of the major exports from, and cigars, because Cuban cigars were all the rage during this time, and the custom was to have a reader, and the reader was chosen from the workers. The reader was somebody that was chosen from the workers, and well, usually it was somebody who was very dramatic or who had a flair for theater. Uh, and there were women who were readers as well. Luisa Capetillo was a reader in the tobacco factories in New York and in Florida. And so they would do this. They had this work day. There were different divisions in the tobacco factories. Some people were stripping the leaves to take the veins out of the leaves. Women did a lot of that. We talk about women strippers, and we don't mean the ones that dance with poles. We mean the ones that strip the tobacco leaf so that they can classify the leaves in a certain manner, like what goes on the outside of the cigar, what stays on the inside, what burns better. They knew all this. And the tobacco makers were usually men. They were the ones that actually rolled the cigars. So what they did was that for 1 hour in the morning and 1 hour in the afternoon, the reader would get up on a high chair so that he could, reach everybody in the factory and read. And and usually they would select to read a novel. Now, everything that they did had social value because they would select novels about about poverty and how people overcame poverty. The work of Dickens was very, very, very important. The work of the French writers during that time when people were organizing to fight for better wages and better working conditions, and people like Dostoevsky from Russia would write novels about the lower class and their struggles. Usually, it had that tone. They would select something that was along those lines, and because they were dramatic readers, you can imagine you would be sitting there working away, listening to this story, and it was lasted only an hour. I had to come back the next day and continue. It was almost like the soap operas, where the story continues. And then in the afternoon, actually, or I don't know if I'm reversing it, but in the afternoon they would read from the newspapers so that the tobacco workers were informed.
I had heard that Bernardo Vega had written about this.
Bernardo Vega wrote about it, but Jesus Colon, when he was a boy in Calle, used to listen at the window. He would sneak up to the tobacco factory and listen at the window when the reader was reading. And that's how he began to develop a social consciousness. And so, of course, when he comes to New York, he joins the Communist Party, and he's a union organizer and a community organizer, and begins to write these sketches of life in New York uh, that that show the problems that the Puerto Rican people were having, or it just gives you a slice of life in the type of stories that he would tell.
Virginia, tell me about your latest project regarding San Juan Hill.
The Legacies of San Juan Hill is an online project that the
A book?
uh, no, it's an online project of essays, and that's what I just wrote for. But the online project is from Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts.
Is it there available?
It's there, yeah, it's their project. It's there. They're beginning to build. They are talking about building archives that relate to the history of the people that used to live in San Juan Hill, because as they put it in the podcast that I did with for Lincoln Center, they're not they didn't want Lincoln Center built on the backs of poor people. They don't want to take credit for Lincoln Center being built, so they're trying now to pay more attention to the music from that community and to the history of that community. And so they've commissioned a series of articles, which if you go online and just plug in Legacies of San Juan Hill, these essays will appear. The podcast is online. The podcast is called, there are 5 of them. and it's the history of the New York Philharmonic. It's called New York Phil, and the five podcasts tell the story of the New York Philharmonic from its beginning to the present. And the last episode, the number 5, is the one that I'm on. It's the one that I just finished writing about my role as a consultant in West Side Story.
Virginia Sanchez Korrol, my friend, thank you. We're proud of you.